The Knocking, a horror story. Bartholomew didn't see himself the way others did. He knew this because he'd heard and read people's views of him all his life. When he'd been a child, his parents often vented their frustrations on him, how he wasn't smart enough, a good enough athlete, and various other shortcomings. Which ones depended on how their finances or blood alcohol levels fluctuated. His teachers often had similar views, though usually more kindly worded and concerned. Other children, his cousins included, were predictably cruel, and while their taunts and sneers were in his opinion unwarranted and, well, childish, they lacked the crushing, calculated stings of their elders. Even when his parents were, tragically, killed in a drunk driving accident, he felt it should be noted it was only tragic to anyone who didn't know them personally, he found the same cruelty in his aunt and uncle, high school classmates, college professors, and various relationships. To them he was loser, waste of time, and in one memorable quote, just lacking in something important. He leaned back in his seat, slowly gazing around his art studio. Sacks, duct tape, zip ties, and various little night-night potions hung about the place, items to make his hunts simple. The thought brought him to what was written about him nowadays, that he was a monster, a deviant, and a sicko. Powerful words, printed bold as brass for a man they'd never met. In fact, in any of the articles, news broadcasts, blogs, posted videos, or comments he'd observed, only one word came close to fitting in his opinion: predator. And that was only if it did not include the S word in front of it. He was no pervert. He was a hunter and an artist. He sighed and looked at his trophy wall, Polaroid photos lovingly tacked next to objects of importance. Beneath his wall, his artist's tools shone bright in the overhead lights, carving blades and pulling hooks, some meant to remove, others to simply alter or decorate his chosen medium: flesh. A problem had arisen, however. His resources were getting harder to find. It was inevitable, he supposed. After two or three of his creations were left on display in various parts of the city, his preferred prey had become wary. Warned by police and government officials, they rarely traveled alone, didn't talk to strangers, and were developing a nasty habit of pulling out their phones and taping everything and anything they found suspicious. In truth, there'd only been one or two who'd come even close to capturing his image, but those were already too many. And that didn't even take into effect the fresh abundance of patrol cars, a visible sign of official eyes now cast upon the shadows he'd once freely scouted. As he brooded on his ill luck, lack of fresh materials, and the prevalence of smartphones among teenagers, he paused. His studio was set up in the basement of a building, necessitated by the need for privacy as well as ease of soundproofing. There were a few windows set at the ground level, though both of those were covered in curtains to block out, well, the risk of attention, really. The lights outside allowed for him to see shadows of anyone moving around out there, and he could have sworn he saw something move quickly past one of the windows. A shadow so fleet he was half convinced it was a trick of the light. Perhaps a raccoon or some other scavenger. The hell? He murmured, standing slowly. He waited, ears straining. Nobody knocked on his door. Ever. Oh, perhaps the rare lost delivery person or wandering religious type who would occasionally brave the neighborhood, seeking either directions or lost souls to save. But his abode had the appearance of someone who would meet such visitors with loud abusive vitriol, or perhaps a firearm. He forced himself to calm. Probably just that church 2 blocks over again. They never stayed. His fingers closed on the handle of a large blade near his chair. More instinct than thought. The holy rollers never locked more than once. Was this it then? Had the so-called authorities stumbled upon some little tidbit? Some stray hair on a piece of tape? A blob of mud in the wrong place? Were they even now gathering outside the door, preparing to assault his den, to bring their filthy guns and blaring judgments into his temple of beauty? Hello? Sound echoed strangely. It sounded like someone was calling through the half-broken sidelight at the front door. It sounded like someone young. Can you help us, please? A frisson of sudden delight raced along Bartholomew's spine. This was too good to be true, as though some higher force was granting him just one more piece to work with. Wait. Us? He paused at the foot of the stairs. Us could be bad. He eased himself up the stairs, keeping his weight off the loudest creaker. He left it unrepaired in case of an intruder, or attempted escape, until he was at the very top. He angled his head toward the door. There seemed to be 2 shapes there, the light from the street lamp at the curb illuminating the pair. If he had to guess by height, he'd wager 15, 16 for the taller one. Just tall enough to lean to the broken glass and call through it. Please, we're lost. Can you let us in? Was this truly a gift? Besides feeling almost too good to be true, something about that voice felt off. Like someone playing a song on the wrong instrument, in the wrong key. Back of his mind buzzed something drowned out by the imaginings of what wonders he could make from those 2. Hold on, I'm coming, he finally called out, stomping up the last few steps and tucking the blade into a crevice in the wall for later. Sorry about that, I was moving some things around in the basement. You 2, by yourselves? Didn't want them thinking no one was home and take off now, would he? He could see them peering through the smudged and cracked sidelight glass on either side of the door now. The taller might have been a girl, the shorter, who knew? Yes, we are. Please let us in. It is cold. That buzz in his mind again. It was actually pretty warm out, though. Maybe they'd been outside all evening? They might even have been swimming or something. The girl's hair was hanging like it was wet or oily. He shrugged off the thought and opened the door. Well, hello there. He put on his best smile, the one that seemed to turn his face from off-putting to approachable. He'd practiced it enough. Lost, are we? What's the matter, those smarty phones of yours run out of juice? Please say yes, please say yes. We don't have phones. We need yours to call our parents. Let us in. The taller one was doing all the speaking. That long, oily-looking hair fell down over a t-shirt that probably had a character or icon on it once, but was so faded it was barely a smudge, with a pair of jeans and some stained running shoes to complete the look. The shorter one, a boy, had yet to speak. His hair was hidden by a baseball cap that also shaded much of his face. A badly stained and ripped hoodie wrapped around his torso, hands deep in the pockets. A pair of gym shorts, the ends tattered and frayed, and sandals that looked ready to fall off covered his legs and feet, respectively. His skin seemed very pale, almost white. That had to be from the streetlight, right? Guys wander a bit too far from home, huh? Cut there, a line there. Pull the skin back on that arm. Let us in. We will not be long. That voice. Every word was what he wanted to hear, and yet something dragged nails down a chalkboard in his brain when she spoke. He could barely make out their faces. He forgot to turn on the lights upstairs again. But he could feel their eyes locked on him, waiting, the tips of their footwear, the very edge of the threshold. Well, I probably shouldn't, but you seem like nice kids. Come on in, make yourselves comfy. I'll grab the phone for you. He turned and started to hurry back inside. He barely made it to the kitchen as the front door was slowly creaking shut. He didn't hear any footsteps, but in the split second before the door clicked shut, he could sense something moving in the house behind him. The pit dropped in his stomach as he snapped the kitchen light on and whirled on his heels. Eyes locked on the front door, then on the pair of sandals laying on the rug as if kicked off for a game. Goosebumps raced from his feet all the way to his forehead, where a cold sweat broke out. The feeling wasn't excitement. He knew the feel of eagerness of a hunt, the ecstasy of his tools working on cooling flesh. This was neither. This was older. This was fear. For the first time in many years, for the first time since he decided to begin his special hunts, he felt the role of predator and prey change in a heartbeat. Kids? He called out into the darkness. You can turn on the light in there if you want. Silence. No, not quite silence. For a moment he heard the sound of something moving, like a large rodent, claws moving on wood. Swallowing hard, he reached slowly round the corner for the light switch. Kids? Pain raced along the back of his hand. With a shriek, he pulled it back, staring without comprehension at the crimson lines trailing blood down his arm. It looked and felt like somebody had struck him with 5 razor blades. A movement was the only warning he got to throw himself backwards as the thin, pale arm lashed around the corner, missing his eyes by inches. He stumbled back into the counter, not taking his eyes off the doorway as he fumbled in the drawers. His fingers closed on a handle, and he pulled a small cleaver free. "Funny!" he barked, voice cracking. "Real funny! You little hoodlums think you can scare me? I cut myself worth shaving!" He thought he saw something move in the shadows, and the blade flailed wildly. More agony raced up his leg, and he looked down in time to see a blood-stained hand vanish back into a broken cupboard from which it had emerged. He also caught the flash of a face, pale, emotionless, with unblinking eyes, black as a mine shaft. He screamed again, the cleaver hacking a chunk of wood from his instinctive swing, only to have a slash across his lower back send him reeling into the counter again. He turned, the blade meeting no resistance as the female thing, these weren't children, these weren't even human, dodged backwards, vanishing down a side hall that led to a bedroom, a bath, and the living room's other opening. Bartholomew lunged, the cleaver biting deep into the door frame. He heard something behind him, but before he could turn, he felt what felt like countless blades lashing at his back, shoulders, one slash even crossing the back of his neck before he could throw himself out of range, striking the stained linoleum with his body. Looking back over his shoulder, he saw the boy thing standing on the wobbly kitchen chair, perfectly balanced in a most unnatural way, as he cocked his head and stared through those unholy obsidian orbs. Run. His mind screamed the word, yet his body could hardly answer. His feet slipped and slid on tiles now damp with his own blood. His arms barely supported him as his shoulders burned. Chills were starting to take over his hands and feet. He was bleeding badly. He needed to get away. His studio. He'd head for the basement. The door was double bolted and very barricadable. He could bandage himself, gather some of his tools, something that fit his hand, and then, oh, he'd show these things, these beasts, these black-eyed freaks. He'd mount their heads on the wall. That's what he'd do. He managed to pull himself to his feet at the top of the basement stairs. He even managed to reach for the knife he'd hidden earlier. The last two strikes were flawless. He'd barely grabbed the blade free of when his tendons in the back of his legs were slashed straight through. He teetered on the edge of the stairs as the monster, the shape of a girl, appeared beside him and struck a blow somewhere between a slash and a shove. The next few moments for Bartholomew were a series of flying, followed by a reality of wood and agony, ending only when he struck the basement door with a crash that shook dust from every surface. As he lay bleeding at the bottom of the stairs, the feeling slowly leaving his limbs, he could hear them crawling closer. There was no speech, no talking, no condemnations or excuses. Like an old lion found by two young hyenas, his hour had simply come. The last thing he saw as his vision faded were the pitiless black eyes set in alabaster skin. The authorities found Bartholomew's house a day later. It probably would have taken them longer. No one knew who he was or where he lived, really. If there hadn't been two sets of child-sized footprints outlined in what later turned out to be blood, leading to the street, the porch, and the empty, blood-spattered stairs. Once the blood was identified as human, a search warrant gave the permission to search. The upstairs was clear, save for a stained kitchen. The basement, well, the basement made headlines. No one knows what happened to the man known as Bartholomew. Some say he skipped town after his last victims escaped. Others claim the owners of the mystery prince overpowered and killed him, then ran for it. Nobody knows for certain. But if you ever have a strange child knocking on your door late at night, asking to come in, and you see deep black pits where you should see eyes, don't invite them in.